I was jealous of my best friend, so I ruined her perfect marriage. Anne has been my best friend ever since we were kids. My mom worked as a maid in her house. We did everything together. We even went to the same school. It was during our late primary school years that I started to resent and get jealous of Anne. Anne came from a very wealthy family. She always got everything she wanted. She was nothing short of perfect. She was beautiful, kind, intelligent, outgoing, and everyone wanted to be her friend. I was everything and wasn't. Shy. An average student with average beauty, and came from a poor background. She never made our social standings hinder our friendship. Whenever she got something, she made sure her parents bought the same for me. Everything I had was paid for by her parents. My phone, laptop, clothes, and even my education. That was why we always went to the same school. I often felt overshadowed by Anne's grace and accomplishments. Jealousy simmered in my heart. I always hid it well behind forced smiles and polite conversations. We grew, and Anne's life seemed much better than mine. She became a renowned interior designer. She married a wealthy man, John, who adored and satisfied her every whim. Me, I became a sales clerk. I always felt that life favored Anne more than me, even though she had tried to persuade me to come work either for her or her parents, but I refused. I wanted to make it on my own without her help so I could bluff it in her face. My resentment towards her only seemed to grow into a silent raging, poisonous envy. Nevertheless, I still remained her ever-faithful best friend. We were 32 when I couldn't take it anymore. My jealousy had reached its peak. I just couldn't stand to see her so happy. Desperation and envy led me to hurt my best friend. Anne and her husband were married for 6 years without any children. The doctor said everything was fine with both of them and that nothing was wrong to hinder the growth of a fetus. Yet still her husband, John, remained with her. Anne used to tell me how John said he didn't care and that all he wanted was her. I devised a scheme. I started to get closer to Anne's husband, but not too close where he would become suspicious. I made sure to turn up at places he was at and took an interest in his hobbies, made conscious efforts to start conversations, and he started to loosen around me. One day, I went online, downloaded sonograms, and forged documents with Anne's signature, took her phone, and with my new number, sent texts between the two numbers before deleting it off her phone. My plan took a whole year before it came to fruition. I remembered that day so clearly. It was a Saturday and Anne had invited me and some other friends shopping, but I declined. I went over to her home to see John. I told him I had gotten closer to him and had come to love him as a friend. So I couldn't with a good heart sit still while Anne made a fool out of him. I showed him the sonogram pictures, the texts, and the consent forms from the baby Yeater clinic. I left him to make his own assumptions. Believing he had been betrayed by his wife, John was devastated and furious. I didn't wait to see the show, but I got a call from Anne later in the evening, sobbing. She came over to my place and told me everything that had occurred. John had accused her of cheating, called her every insult in the world, and demanded a divorce. He wouldn't tell her his source, and she wondered who would hurt her like that. As the ever-faithful best friend, I did my utmost best to console Anne and let her stay the night. I waited a while before swooping in. I comforted John, feeding on his vulnerabilities all the while still being a good friend to Anne. I took very good care of John. I cleaned his home, fed him, did his laundry, and cared for him in the best way I could. It was the Sunday of what was supposed to be Anne's birthday, but due to the divorce, the party was called off. I went over to John's, and one thing led to another. We ended up spending the night together on his and Anne's marital bed. It was in that moment that Anne burst through and saw us. All I remember was her screaming, crying, and laying curses upon us. My friendship with Anne was ruined. I never wanted it to end that way. Eventually, I found out I was pregnant. I told John and we ended up getting married. Finally, I thought, I have rid myself of poverty. I will no longer have to suffer. But boy, was I wrong. John's wealth came with stipulations. I could never dress how I like, could never go out anytime I wanted. All my time and attention needed to be on him. He found fault in everything I did, always told me, that's not the way Anne did it. Marriage with him was mentally draining and physically exhausting. I never saw him like this with Anne. The new life I had dreamt of soon became a nightmare. I found myself isolated with no one to talk to. My parents wouldn't even talk to me. Worse still, John began treating me with contempt, leaving me to feel like a stranger in our home. In the course of our 5 years of marriage, I gave birth to 2 girls, all with special needs. Our firstborn had Rett syndrome and severe intellectual disability, while the other had Huntington's disease with progressive cognitive decline. Their care fell entirely on me, as John would go out early in the morning and come back late at night. It was then I found out that he was cheating on me with several women, and had a son outside of our marriage, who was perfectly healthy. The day I heard of it, I wept bitterly. I intentionally got pregnant again, hoping to prove that I could also birth healthy babies. During our 3-month scan, the doctor told us that the child would be a special needs child if born. John threw me out of the house and demanded a divorce, and brought the woman who had birthed him his son to live in our house. I moved to my parents, and my mother said my life now was a punishment for the wrongdoing that I had done. My life worsened. I gained custody of my girls, and John refused to acknowledge the girls as his. He signed over his rights as their father and washed his hands off of them. I became the sole provider and caretaker of the girls. With my meager salary, it wasn't much. My parents helped, but it still wasn't enough. Regret haunted my days. I hated what I had done to my best friend. I took my girls and went to visit Anne. I wanted to beg for her forgiveness and to ask for help, but as soon as she saw me, she threw me out of her house. And it hurt. My jealousy and lies had come back to destroy my happiness. There are days I want to run and leave the girls, to be free of this duty. Because I'm their mother, I can't. I'm left to live out my days in regret while John is happy with his perfectly healthy family. My mother warned me that I would regret my choices, and it's safe to say she was right. I really miss my best friend. I wish I never made these choices.